Hi, this is Robert Shear with another edition of Sheer Intelligence, where the intelligence comes from my guest. In this case, Judy Karofsky, somebody who started out on a city council in Wisconsin at a town and then became mayor, went on or along the way, got two different master's degrees, and expert in a lot of things, but she became an expert on healthcare for basically older people. And she did it because she was cared about her mother, who had incapacitating stroke, needed full-time care, and she went around, I think, six different institutions, and found, I forget the way you summarize it, they were at best inefficient and at worst inhuman. And you described the overworked people. I mean, the main drill here is that we don't really regulate this industry, which is very expensive. Actually, it's a budget buster for many people. In fact, I'm of the age where I think about these things a lot, and I found it disconcerting that Medicare doesn't actually provide uh, service. They pay the institution, but not, you somehow don't have control. I'll let you explain that. But it was a reality check for me because I'm still functioning and working full time, but those days are, I guess, numbered. And so I'd like you to get into this whole thing. The book is called Disorderly Conduct. Actually, it's just coming out. No, it comes out May 13th, right? According to this
And
cheat sheet.
13th, and the title is Diselderly Conduct.
Yes, yes. Did I say disorderly?
You might have, but I didn't hear you say that.
Okay. In disorderly conduct, the flawed business of assisted living and hospice, and it's New Village Press. And anyway, it's technically comes out May 13th. But I want to say everybody has to read this book because there's going to be, whether it's you who needs to care or people care about. She describes her relationship to her mother, and you care about people. Certainly, your mother, most people do, your relatives, and suddenly they're in this very vulnerable position, and you're leaving there to the tender mercies of other people. And sometimes you can't blame those people. They're poorly paid, or they're not regulated, or the administrators of the institutions are not doing a good job or don't know how to do a good job. So I'm going to let you set the stage for what is really a amazing national problem. We have a population that's supposed to, of older people, is supposed to double in the next 40 years. This is the major crisis for most families when their loved ones get a serious illness that incapacitates them. How do you deliver care? A lot of people go broke signing up. I know I have for several long term care plans. You'll probably tell me they don't work either. So I'm going to throw the ball to you to tell me why you wrote this book and what it's all. But I should have said, as mayor, you actually pioneered some senior care programs and so forth. So you brought some considerable expertise because you've also, I think you have an MBA or something.
I do have
Uh,
a master's in business. Yes, correct.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and actually
So
the focus was on real estate development and urban land economics, which set me up to do the research and the study.
right.
Um,
So take it away. You
I
also
will
did
take
work
it.
for the governor and all that. Yeah, yeah.
I want you to know this is a national problem, as you said. Bring the focus back to you, by 2040, 20% of Californians will be 65 or older. And that's up from 14% in 2020, that's within 20 years. So there's no, and Californians, those are your people, have no way to check whether a provider at a health facility or a home health agency has previously been banned from assisted living. I bring that up because that article was posted in the LA Times in March of 2025, just 2 months ago. And it was actually about the licensing. And when licenses are taken away, the people who own and these facilities just move into another kind of health care, and they'd start working with a different agency. The overarching problem is there is no federal regulation. no oversight, no words that say what assisted living could or should not be, or what the staffing should be, or the activities, or the care, or the ambiance, or the food should be. Nursing homes, yes, and we should clear that up in the beginning. You and I are talking about assisted living. A nursing home is a different kind of facility, and they are supported by Medicaid, and they do have federal regs, and they have federal um, categories that they fall into, so that you can find out if it's a class A, or I think it's 5 star, a 5 star, or a 4 star, or 3 star. The federal government has no again, oversight over nursing homes. In January of 2024, now a year and a half ago, there was a hearing before a Senate committee that included a young senator named J.D. Vance. It included Liz Warren, and the senators that appeared at the hearing were ready to discuss the issue. It was under Senator Casey, I think from uh, well, we'll find out where he was from. He was not from Massachusetts. Liz Warren was the Massachusetts senator, and someone that I follow. You might be able to tell by my accent that I came from Boston. But after the hearing was over, Senator Warren especially said, we have to do something about this. But that was a year and a half ago. And what's happened since is all the things that we know, the campaigns, the election, and the total disruption, dismantling of our federal departments that could maybe have taken some oversight, have maybe taken care of this. So the situation has really changed for me in the time between the time that I started to write the book, was writing the book, and after I wrote it. I started to write the book. Well, I didn't know I was writing a book. I was keeping track of the things that my mother said. My mother was witty, she was willful, and some things were worth recording. And then over time, I started to keep track of things that were sort of going wrong and starting to bother me. And yes, as you said, she was in assisted living. She had to move there after she had a stroke. And then about a year after she moved to an assisted living facility, she fell and broke her hip. I have some questions about how that fall might have occurred, whether she might have been standing behind the door in her room and the door opened in and she wasn't near her walker. And somebody said, as I walked into the building, about 5 minutes later, your mother's on the floor. Well, a broken hip is immobilizing. The rest of her life was spent in a wheelchair, in a series of wheelchairs. And in time, hospice joined her care. So then now I was dealing with not only the hospital, but the assisted living facilities and hospice. And I was writing. Yeah, I was writing. I was writing about the meals. I wrote about the series of grilled cheese sandwiches that my mother ate for lunch and for dinner, meal after meal, along with her other table mates. In fact, they called it the Lois sandwich because Lois started this trend towards grilled cheese sandwiches. But it's worse than that because the they might have liked them, but they weren't nutritious. And I knew that my mother was not getting any kind of balanced diet, for sure not a well balanced diet. And I talked to some of the administrators about that. And then
Where was this? Was this in Wisconsin?
this was in Wisconsin. And in case I forgot to say this, states do have oversight over assisted living facilities. I'm not familiar with the exact oversight that California has, except for that article that I recently read from the LA Times talking about how if they lose their licensure, they still have the ability to stay in that field. They just change the definition of the type facility that they're going to own and they move on to a different department. The biggest problem is reporting.
So there's money to be made in this?
There's so much money to be made in this because there's no limitations on what they do, what they provide. There's heavy, heavy advertising. You said, yeah, I heard you say you've been thinking about this. We all have. We're kind of in the same, we are in the same generation. I don't know, well, I can imagine about you, but I receive postcards and flyers weekly talking, trying to show me the happy life in an assisted living facility. The advertising is relentless. The advertising, as I bring up in a chapter called Bait and Switch, is untruthful. Even my mother knew that. My mother actually had spent her career in advertising. She knew when something was fake. She knew when she was being somebody was trying to describe something that was not going to happen. So the activities that are described, the meals that are described, in fact, the care that's described rarely happens, because I think you were leading towards this. That might cost money, and there's no reason for these facilities to spend any more than they need to spend on a daily basis. What's happened recently?
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in your book, I think
Please.
you gave some figures that it's the average, the low people. How much do people spend a year? You had a range,
um, I don't. You can spend $20,000 a month in some facilities, up to 20, probably 5 to 12. I'm really not familiar with the current nationwide care numbers, because it varies. Because if you or I apply now, well, the first thing they're going to want from us, by the way, will be our financial statement. I had to submit my mom's financial statement, tax return, each time she was being interviewed for entering one of the an assisted living facility, and she entered 6 different ones. So they want to know that you will be capable of paying their fees for probably 3 years. I think they calculate that the stay will be 3 years. But
and this is not the same as long-term care, is it?
it is a form of long-term care.
So
Long-term care
you have a
includes.
long. I have a fairly expensive policy
Mhm,
for long-term care. I forget what it costs, but quite a bit. I think
mhm.
700 a month or something. I'm not sure. I may, and well, maybe that's my with my wife. I forget the whole deal, but it's a chunk that comes out
I find
every
out.
month.
But
And
it might work for for some people it works, and maybe I should have said this at the beginning, so let's go back to the beginning, or I want to say, for some people this care works. For some people, the assisted living experience, the hospice care really does work, because I've had people say that to me. It worked for my dad, it worked for my mom. But I've also had so many people turn to me, call me, write to me, Facebook me about the realization that this is really a business. You're caught in a business. This is not a healthcare e- effort. In Wisconsin, and I'm sure it must be the same in most states, assisted living facilities are limited to no more than 3 hours of medical care a week. And that means that many facilities do not even have a nurse in attendance. For sure, no physician, no nurse. And if there is a nurse on board, that person is frequently part of the administration. And if those 3 hours occur to change a bandage, oversee some medication, that goes by very quickly. So these are not healthcare facilities. And since we were just about to get to the financing part, do they make money? They make a lot of money. And what has happened recently is the incursion of private equity. We've heard about that. REITs,
yeah,
ironically, pension funds, because the pension funds support the REITs, support the private equity. Um, once they became involved, then I knew the answer to whether they make money. And once they became involved, the management, the response to situations in a facility is remote. Many times when my mother was in one facility and I would receive a call at night that she was on the floor, because that happened. She would call because she needed assistance, needed to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It took a long time, and she still thought she could leave her bed and walk to the bathroom, which of course she couldn't. I'd receive a call. I live in central Wisconsin. I'd receive a call from northern Minnesota, which is where the night nurse for all of their Midwest facilities was located. I became, in time I knew her by name. That's not funny. that the remote management, the remote care, the remote decision making is also part of the bait and switch picture. That's not what you're buying. When you walk in the door and think, I'm gonna be good here. This will be a comfortable place to be. There's pretty couches. I see a TV in the corner. I know there's a dining room somewhere in this facility. They may even give me a meal. But day by day, the situation changes. It's not what it seems what you hope it will be when you first walk in.
So, how many people are, say, right at this moment in an assisted living facility in
There
the
are
United States?
30,000 in the country, so we can multiply that by a couple of hundred, I suppose. And there's also an ancillary.
Wait, I didn't get what you said. There's 30,000. Where
Do I have that number correct? I think I do. Over 30,000 in the country right now.
facilities?
Yes. And
I, I,
how many residents? So there are so many different kinds of assisted living. There are the small ones. There still are those because I saw them along my route that are mom and pop, owned by a small family. But for the most part, they've been bought out, and there are large publicly traded corporations that own facilities in many states. My mother started in one that was locally owned and managed. It carried the name of a local hospital, actually. But the day came when the board of that hospital appeared in the common room, and I just happened to be there that day with my mom to tell us that they had done their quote due diligence and that they were being bought out by a facility in Oregon, closer to you. So by a corporation in Oregon, nonprofit. That's an interesting word too, that some of these are nonprofit, which doesn't mean that they're not making money. Someone's making money. Someone's earning a very high salary, actually. It's insidious.
so, so what are we talking about? Million people, millions, or swept? I mean, what happens to most people when they need assisted living? They have a family members, or they stay at home. I mean, these are people who don't really require a lot of medical presence unless they fall or something. They're basically can't take care of themselves, so they need assistance and to
What are
be.
we talking about? I can the way that's the history of assisted living. And by the way, it's not that old. Uh, it started in 1980. 1980. Someone named Karen Brown Wilson, who was in Oregon. Her mom had a stroke at age 55, and she was placed in a nursing facility, a nursing home, because that's what we had, which meant that she was institutionalized. She was told when she could get up, when she could leave, when she could go to the bathroom, what she had, her medicines were given to her. And she turned to her daughter and said, I want something else. And her daughter was in graduate school. She was studying gerontology. She and her husband invented this, coined the phrase assisted living. They were looking for a home where somebody could be cared for, have help with daily activities of living, um, um, ambulation if they needed it, toileting if they needed it, meals if they needed it, but could still come and go. And I think that's what you're hoping for, that you would be able to walk out of the assisted living some afternoon with somebody who would help you into the car and still leave and go someplace, that you could go to a nearby restaurant. When Karen Brown Wilson started her facility, it was called Park Place. It was in Oregon. There are 164 people. We can start doing the math there. But after a while, she owned another one, and then another one, and then another one. And by the time she was ready to take leave of it because it had grown so big, there were facilities in many Western states. She was quoted, and she's quoted by Atul Gawande, the author of Being Mortal, as saying, I love assisted living because the concept She still loved the concept, still loves the concept. But she is quoted as saying assisted living doesn't work because the organizations grew and investors came into the picture and management was farther from the facility. And didn't you say to me, did they make money? And the profits were bigger and bigger. That's what it was. It became a money making operation, profiteering, because the demographics aren't changing. These facilities do not have to do market studies. They don't have to know if there will be new buyers. The buyers will come. We are the buyers because we're aging. And our children, our decision makers, are the buyers because they will be making decisions for us.
And they also have to get about with their lives and their work. So
Indeed,
they
indeed.
can't do it at home and maybe in a more traditional
And in other
family
and in other
situation.
cultures and in other times, even in our culture, older people did live with their children, and they still do. Some do, um, but we're living longer as part of the issue, and we should be. We've made medical advances that have allowed us to be ages that we've achieved, and we hope to live even longer. And we're pretty healthy as we age, but there are some activities of daily living, ADRs as they're called in the industry, with which we will need help and do need help. And we've left out one ancillary part of this, which is a memory care facility. It's important for people to understand two or three things. One, assisted living is a business. That will be on your mid semester. The second is that a memory care facility is an assisted living facility. It's the same thing. Same kind of advertising, same kind of bait and switch, same kind of remote decision making, some remote care. The only difference really in a memory care facility is that the outside doors are locked. People can't wander.
Yeah.
Sometimes perhaps the activities are formulated so that they're more for people who have memory care or memory problems, but really that's the only difference.
So let
So
me
add those to the people population that's in assisted living.
so let me cut to the heart of your book because first of all, you describe a picture of your mother being abused, ignored. I mean, even sexually abused.
Correct.
So let's talk about. I mean, it's really a very depressing picture. And then the question that it begs is why isn't there regulation? Why is this abuse allowed to happen? The abuse could be in poor health care, poor food, uh, physical violence, or indifference, or right.
All
So,
all of the above. That the population
and
that's
to make it more personal, tell us this is
yeah,
what why you wrote this book. So
I
let's get the energy behind it. What you wrote this book was you're upset about the system and you're trying to get it changed. So tell us why you're that upset and
I was
what you would need
I
to
was
make.
upset about the things that did happen to my mom along the way. Yes, she was um, fondled by a male caregiver, and she was capable of telling me how and when that happened. And there was no reporting on that. If you say to me, "Why did it happen?" I don't know. It's human nature. These things happen in all parts of the society, unfortunately. But there's no way to report this. There's no way to know that person has been reprimanded, re-educated, fired, and the person who was making the claim, I knew what she was saying and I knew how she was saying it, and there was no question that it was accurate. Um, but the person who the claim was made about was an employee of the administrator slash nurse of the facility. It fell upon that person to take action, which didn't happen. It fell upon that person to do some reporting, and that didn't happen. What did happen was that the male person, the caregiver, was kept from my mom's room. And my mom, after that, became pretty quiet and sullen in that facility. We moved her out shortly after, not just for that reason. In another facility, I received a call early in the morning that there was a strawberry mark on my mom's arm. And when I went to see her, that was not a strawberry mark. There were black and blue marks all up her arm. When I put her to bed at night, I could see the fingerprints above the black and blue mark. And my mom, who was not suffering from Alzheimer's, who did have a certain amount of dementia, age related and stroke related, I have her on tape. I took a video when she said to me that the caregiver said to her, "I'll give you something to cry about." So here's my mom, abused by a caregiver in a facility that I'm paying whatever the cost was at that time, $6,000 or $7,000 a month for, perhaps. And I was there all the time. I was there every day, but I wasn't there early that morning. When I spoke to the director of that facility, this is what he said to me: "Judy, you put her to bed last night." So he actually was blaming me. So quite honestly, I didn't have time for that. It was not accurate. I had put her to bed in the night. Two other caregivers came of the young nursing assistants, heard about the accusation, came to see me and said, "You know what? We helped her to the bathroom in the night. She did not have any marks in the night." So my mom, who could have maybe um, been a good witness someplace, reported accurately to the police, to the facility, in court maybe, she was not going to do that. She was at that time in her late 90s. When the police came later in the day, because I had called them about this injury, which they didn't consider an emergency, so they didn't come for several hours later, this is what my mother said. She said, "You know, I was at my book club last night, and I listened to this sweet, adorable person with a bruised arm bring up a book club that she hadn't gone to in maybe 20 years. But she did not want to be part of the reporting mechanism." But I knew this had happened. And as it turned out, within 2 years, I mentioned the name of the person that my mother had pointed out to me. I knew which caregiver had injured my mom, and her name was a unique name. And when I used said something about that person to another person in another facility, because my mom had moved on, she told me that that person had injured somebody else in another facility in the same city and had been fired. So I don't, is that the end of the story? I guess that's the end of the story. For me, it was that my mom was exposed to caregivers who weren't trained, caregivers who didn't uh, exude the sense of help and caring. They certainly were not medical personnel, and and they too had stories. I knew that all along because my mother loved those who loved her, and I loved those whom my mother loved. She knew about their children. She knew about the weddings in their families. She wanted to be close to, and she was, to a lot of her caregivers. That was her way of dealing with it. But there were those who broke human rules, really, and weren't kind to the very people they were entrusted with.
So, and we're going to wrap this up now, but the book is called This Elderly Conduct: The Flawed Business of Assisted Living and Hospice. And a New Village Press, just, well, it's coming out in the next few days here. But I just want to conclude really the takeaway is we have this industry as another extension of the medical industry, which is performing very, very poorly. And there's no accountability, even less than in the rest of the medical industry. There's no effective federal regulation. And even on the state level, it seems to be hit or miss. And yet, the irony is these places are being bought up by, and this is really an important takeaway, by money managers, by private equity funds. It was really what was built into the whole housing bubble when housing collapsed. So much of the mischief in our society comes from very well educated, respectable, affluent investors and those who serve them in private equity firms, meaning they're not really under any transparency or accountability, and they want to squeeze every dollar they can out of other people's suffering.
The
And that's
accountability
really,
is the bottom line. That's the bottom line for each facility, for each corporation, for the industry. Are they making enough money to attract investment? And we do want people to invest money to flow into these businesses, because we do want to have homes for people who are aging.
yeah,
I
but
would,
why does the money have to flow from people who are trying to rip off other people? If
huh?
you would think, if there was one area of society, now we hear even Social Security is coming under attack, and Elon Musk and others in the government now want to redesign Social Security. But in any decent society, and certainly this was true even a part of our history for all of our love of the free market, there was an idea that there is a social need, a social good, a social responsibility, and people who are in the last stage of their life, or even if they don't have this money to pay for it, should be entitled to care and coverage and so forth, and have dignity uh, in this last stage. And the idea that we don't have any societal responsibility, you could have Elizabeth Warren sitting next to J.D. Vance, same Senate committee, and they both can leave that meeting and still not actively deal with the problem, come up with a solution. So I want to say my own little editorializing here, as someone who's paying a lot of money for health care. I can do it. I work hard. I'm still working at the age of 89. I'm still paying into my Social Security and paying in, for my basically my own. I'm not. I don't get Medicare except if I'm in the hospital. I have my own company plan. Where I work. But the point of the matter is, we're talking about a growing population of people who need this kind of care, and it should be a societal obligation to fulfill it,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
People pay taxes all through their life, sales taxes, work, the deduction, everything, taxes, taxes, taxes. You would think there's an obligation. You're somebody who, in addition to studying industry and getting a master's degree in business, but you were in government, and at some point, any decent society has to take care of the old. That's it. Whether their children can do it or
That's
not.
who we are. What began as following my mom, my cute mom, who had some very funny things to say about things that were happening on a daily basis, and then it became the need to just spark a discussion, as one very smart um, graduate student said last summer, that my hope, that Judy's hope, was to spark a discussion. And now, because of where we are, we really have a call to action. And that's it. We have to say that we're the elders, or responsible for the elders. And we can't let our needs get lost in all that's going on in this country right now.
Yeah, and the idea that this is where the people who want to exploit every nickel, and what they're doing basically, yes, you have union pension funds, you have government pension funds, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, most of these private equity firms are dealing with the money of very, very wealthy people.
Yes,
And we saw that in the housing meltdown.
yes.
None of the people who did the rip-off schemes went to jail or anything, and people lost their homes. They lost their life savings. And this certainly is how families get impoverished. They're not going to abandon their older people, but they're going to have to pay a lot of money in pursuit of some kind of care so that their grandparents don't suffer, their own parents don't suffer, and they go broke doing this, fulfilling this obligation, which should be certainly in providing safe, affordable care, senior care, should in any decent society be a societal obligation. Every single religion, everybody talks about being religious, endorses that idea. Every culture we've ever seen in the world has judged itself most clearly and harshly over how it treats the elderly. You go any culture, anywhere, in the world and throughout human history. How do we treat the elderly? being older myself, I'm not making a self plea. I'm fortunate enough that I think I got it covered. Maybe after reading your book, I wonder if I do. But which is another reason to read this book. If you have a smug attitude that you know how your last years are going to be managed, read this book. The book is called Diselderly Conduct: The Flawed Business of Assisted Living and Hospice. Okay. And, assisted living, the need for it, and hospice, unfortunately, is in every family's schedule. And so this is a must read book. I urge people to do that. I want to thank you, Judy Karofsky, for writing it, for caring, for extending your own personal issue with your mother and your love to solving this or helping to solve a societal problem for other people. So my hat's off to you. And let me just also say I want to thank the people who helped me put this show on. Joshua Shear, our executive producer, who, and I'll say, uh, kept bugging me to do this. Maybe it's because he's concerned, being my son, that he's going to have to, what kind of assisted living am I going to get? Diego Ramos, who's the managing editor of SharePost, our website that carries this and writes the intro. Max Jones, who does the video. The JKW Foundation, in memory of Gene Stein, a terrific public intellectual and writer, for helping us financially, and Integrity Media, a very good criminal lawyer, Len Goodman, who got behind this idea of the needs of a free press and in the interest of maintaining a free press during a stage in which there's great insecurity of how media is even going to function in any responsible way, for also giving us some support. See you next week with another edition or next episode, since I've upped these to now a couple of three times a week. I used to do it only 1 week for every week for NPR, but now I'm free to fly every day and take these on. So we'll see you another next
Thank you. Thank
session.
you for making this an issue. Thank you.
Well, I'm of that age where I can't be totally. I just want to end on that. We all can construct our own safe narrative until you get the Alzheimer, until you have the fall, until And I'm in a lot of waiting rooms at my age these days, and I know even people who thought they had it all figured out suddenly find themselves going bankrupt or can't. They're not getting the care they need. That's where your book registered with me. You had two people who are basically successful in your mother and you, in the context of America. You worked hard. You thought you had a good. You could manage things. After all, you were a mayor and so forth. And the fact of the matter is, when you're up against a harsh bureaucracy that's indifferent, when you're up against money grubbing private equity firms that want to get every last dollar, suddenly you find yourself without a voice and without being able to do very much. It's tragic, but it's also the way things are. Hopefully, they can be changed. So, thanks for doing this, and see you next time.